I read a very interesting comment just now, and I wanted to go ahead and point it out to y'all. I've hid the writer's name because I thought, this is something that's very interesting. The person said, "I'm not a console warrior. I own a PC, a PS5, a Switch, and a Steam Deck." Then they said, "I think the multi-platform approach is terrible." In their minds, they say exclusives drive competition. This, to me, ladies and gentlemen, is not true, because exclusives are there to drive the advancement of a platform at the detriment or at the financial burden to the consumer. It's anti-competitive when it's a third-party issue at hand. And I'm going to point out why I put the third-party qualifier there. Then they said they always have. No, they haven't. And I'll show you this particular approach that this person wrote. They said the reason Sony released so many amazing games over the past 3 decades was because they needed consumers to choose their system over others. Well, here's the thing. The PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3, and PlayStation 4 reportedly, by people who played heavily on those platforms, had access to other third-party publishers' games that really did make people come to their platforms to buy those games. For instance, Final Fantasy, which actually started out as being a game that was relegated to the Nintendo platform, showed up on PlayStation and for the most part stayed there and built an audience there. Tomb Raider, even though it had its PC, leanings, also had a very huge presence on the PlayStation platform as well. And there are other games that can be cited that attracted people that are not PlayStation's first-party games. And so when we actually look through it and go look at games that got discontinued in the PlayStation 3 and PlayStation 4 era, especially games like Resistance, games like Killzone, and so on and so forth, you cannot make that claim because there's no data to back it up. If players were actually buying these consoles for those games, we'd have a Resistance 4, especially when you think about Insomniac's former boss who just retired and his interview where he said they tried to pitch the Resistance 4 game to PlayStation and they said, nah, we're not going to go with it. Do you know why? When I looked at the sales, that game compared to Gears of War within the same sales period, I think it was about 2 months or something like that, or 2 weeks or something like that, only sold about 100,000 units. That's how crazy it is. So when people talk about exclusivity, all we got to go do is look at the numbers of these first-party exclusives, and you'll see that it's not really because of these first-party exclusives that people were buying these consoles. So this is just a misconception because the data doesn't back it up. I mean, till date, PlayStation's highest-selling game, Horizon Zero Dawn, in terms of units, is one that actually found its way to PC, the first of their games in terms of their major single-player first-party games that made it to PC. Every other game, when you look at that list compared to like Nintendo, you're going to realize that PlayStation games, they only basically will reach their full peak in terms of getting close to Nintendo's, top 4 or 5 when they actually make their way to other platforms, because not enough folk are buying those games on the platforms. Another example is Astrobot. Astrobot only sold about 2 million units in a platform that has sold about 65 million units. Why are these players not buying these games if you say that exclusives are the reason? Marvel Spider-Man 2 sold less than Helldivers 2. And then came to PC as the fastest of all of the first-party single-player games so far. So then you said something that I think may have unveiled your hand. You said by putting their games everywhere, they have a green light to lower the quality. And then you said like Xbox has done with Game Pass. These are two incoherent statements that you've actually put in place, and I'll explain to you. You said by putting their games everywhere, they basically are getting into reducing the quality of the games. Now, from a logical perspective, if your games were going to go compete with other third-party games, which actually sell the most, more than PlayStation's games and Xbox games, would it not be imperative that you actually improve the quality to be able to match and compete with those other games? So again, that is a very illogical statement that you've made, because if their games are trash, no one's going to buy them. And so the point of even putting them on those other platforms is moot. Then you said like Xbox has done with Game Pass. This is a variation, ladies and gentlemen, of that Game Pass reduces the quality of games argument, which I've always claimed, and rightly so, that is a very silly argument because it really holds no water. Seeing as Game Pass is mostly comprised of third-party games all over the place, especially old third-party games that were later added to Game Pass after the fact. So yes, people will say, well, okay, maybe there's a new game coming on Game Pass that a third-party developer made. Well, how about all the other games that were added to Game Pass after they had been launched? Xbox is not responsible for the quality of those games. In fact, even the third-party games that are launched on Game Pass, Xbox is still not responsible for the quality of those games. The developers of those games are responsible for the quality of those games, and a good number of them, if not most of them, have all been quality games. Do you want to argue with Lies of P? Do you want to argue with Wolong Fallen Dynasty? Do you want to argue with Sniper Elite, the game that just recently came out, from Rebellion Studios? You can't. Because again, this is coming from a position where you've already made up your mind about Xbox's own business strategy and then tied a very weird, incoherent statement before coming out there. Are you going to argue with the quality of Forza? Are you going to be able to argue with the quality of the Ninja Gaiden, Black game that basically got remastered? I mean, you got to really think about some of these things before you go ahead and you say them, because I guess it just really exposes that for some strange reason, everything that you want, people want to point out that Xbox is doing is bad in some sense. Now, here's the second side of the conversation. You said putting their games everywhere gives the reduction of quality. Let me kind of open your eyes to something very interesting. Marvel Spider-Man 2 just launched on PC, and at its launch, it was buggy when it showed up. So would you say, or can we then go ahead and conclude and say that PlayStation, now putting more of its games on PC, has now put it in a position where its quality is now down? We can't make that conclusion. Do you know why? It will be disingenuous. It would also basically go ahead and ignore the reality that there are other PlayStation games on PC that have actually launched with significant amounts of quality. So again, if I tried to make this same argument and I put PlayStation in that category, I'd be called disingenuous. So in this light, I'd say this is not an argument that we can entertain and should be dumped down the drain, because it doesn't make any sense. At the end of the day, some people still believe and think that exclusivity is very valuable in some sense, when it's not. When you actually take a very close look at what's going on, the whole proposition of exclusivity has basically been anti-consumer, because most of it has targeted third-party games. Say these consoles were going first-party as their exclusive content, they would more than likely not be able to compel as many people as you think they will, because we're seeing the behaviors of a lot of these people. They're constantly playing live service games. They're constantly playing community-style games that are not exclusive to anywhere. If exclusives were all this big deal, why has the weekly engagement tracker constantly showed that majority of the games on it are live service games? In fact, Matt Piscatella now has to go ahead and highlight some entrants that have come from the bottom all the way to the top. In some cases, they're single-player games, and if you look at their previous week position, you'll be shocked. For instance, let's look at this. In the case of PlayStation, High on Life shows up, and it moved from last week's 193rd position all the way up into the top 10. And Payday 3 had been sitting in rank 211, which is sort of a live service game. Pac-Man World Repack was on the 667th position. And then in the Xbox side, Far Cry New Dawn, which I think because it made its way to Game Pass, shot up from 308th position to the 11th position. Monster Hunter Wilds on PC is already at number 4. Kingdom Come Deliverance is already at number 7. Only the Lord knows where Kingdom Come Deliverance exists on these two platforms, because it's probably maybe a number, because Matt Piscatella only publishes number 15, the top 15. It may be sitting at number 16. I hadn't broken into the top 16 on these two platforms. So these two boxes, Xbox and PlayStation, all they are just live service machines. That's all they are for the most part. Anybody who wants to launch on there basically has a hard time. In fact, it looks like PC is where there are more open-minded folk that would buy a wider variety of your games and actually play them and not be beholden to the madness of live service. But again, in all fairness, majority of live service games that are on PC that are the big heavy hitters that you're seeing here, they are actually hosted on other platforms like Fortnite and Call of Duty, which Call of Duty is mostly hosted on Battle.net on PC, and Fortnite is on Epic Games. So again, in all fairness, PC will probably look similar in some instances to console where those games are being hosted on Steam. So this talk about exclusivity, forget the notion. It's already dead and gone. Games now need to go everywhere, because if developers have to fight against this and their games don't sell, they'll close the studios. These companies are not playing around, man. Y'all are over here screaming exclusivity on the internet, but people are going to lose their jobs if these studios do not find ways to sell their games. You have to think about it. These companies have a very low tolerance for losses at this moment in time. So who suffers that? The developers. Unless, of course, you who like exclusives, you're willing to buy 2 copies, like Shuhei Yoshida has basically recommended that y'all do. Thanks for watching the video. Talk to me in the comment section. I appreciate you guys this time and audience. And hopefully we'll talk pretty soon in another one. Peace out.